Right, so Keir Starmer is going to whip his MPs not to abstain this time on the SNP's ceasefire vote tonight, apparently, as he did last time, but he's actually going to back the Tories wholeheartedly and whip his party to vote against it. Labour will vote against the ceasefire in Gaza. A three-line whip is being laid down, so any of his MPs rebelling and voting with the SNP face possible censure, and any frontbenchers who do so will face the sack. His reasons for it this time? The usual accusations against the SNP of playing politics. But actually that is exactly what Starmer is doing. And despite the SNP motion not having a hope of passing, even if only the Tories voted it down, Starmer is refusing to back it, we're told, over one line in it. And that really does bear paying close attention to, because if true, Starmer's stance hasn't budged an inch from the very beginning of these latest atrocities following October 7th, and that makes him one very sick individual indeed. Right, so I covered the SNP ceasefire motion the other day in a video, but here's a reminder of the wording of it. That this House calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and Israel, notes with shock and distress that the death toll has now risen beyond 28,000, the vast majority of whom were women and children, further notes that there are currently 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering in Rafah, 610,000 of whom are children, also notes they have nowhere else to go, condemns any military assault on what is now the largest refugee camp in the world, further calls for the immediate release of all hostages taken by Hamas and an end to the collective punishment of the Palestinian people, and recognises that the only way to stop the slaughter of innocent civilians is to press for a ceasefire now. Let's also remind ourselves a moment of what Keir Starmer said to Scottish Labour conference just the other day. Scottish Labour backing a ceasefire as well, as it happens. And he told them, an end to the fighting, not just now, not just for a pause, but permanently. A ceasefire that lasts. Conference, that is what must happen now. The fighting must stop now. He told Labour members in Scotland that he wanted a ceasefire, and now, instead of that, he's actually going to vote against it, it would seem. All the protests, all the fallout, 10 frontbench resignations last time when he whipped to abstain on a ceasefire amendment last November, but no. Not this time. This time, it looks like he's actually going to vote against it, and there will be a three-line whip in place over his own party on that. Not only is this proof that he will happily lie to the faces of his own members on the matter of a ceasefire, completely contradicting what he said in Scotland just 2 days ago, but the reasoning behind it shows he's not actually changed at all. The line that Starmer apparently has a problem with in the SNP motion is the one that says, calling for an end to collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Because Starmer apparently hates this line. It is a red line for him. That is why the motion must be voted against now, apparently. This reminded me early doors back in October of Starmer being asked whether Israel had the right to cut off food, water and fuel. It is still one of the standout, most awful political comments made since October 7th by any British politician, and Starmer has never apologised for it. Only denied he ever said it, despite it being said on TV and for all the world to see and still going around on social media now, as it always will. But as we know, cutting off such essentials is a war crime. It is collective punishment. And we know Israel did it. And we know they've kept on denying aid to the area. And we know they have killed civilians indiscriminately for 4 months, leading to the deaths of some 30,000 people, of which some 12,000 are children. We know collective punishment has been committed by Israel. It was a significant part of the evidence by South Africa against Israel at the ICJ too. Yet here we are, late February, 4 months on, still no apology from Starmer for his advocation of collective punishment. He never apologises for anything after all. And this act now to oppose a ceasefire and slap a three-line whip on it as well, because of calls to end collective punishment, well, to my mind it means he didn't misspeak in the beginning, did he? He meant what he said, didn't he? And despite being a human rights lawyer, as he is always telling us he is, that plays secondary to his political ambition and his acquiescence to Israel, even as they stand accused of a plausible case of genocide. It's also worth noting that the Scottish Labour conference passed a ceasefire motion the day before Starmer addressed them, which included the line, Conference supports Israel's right to protect its citizens in line with international law, affirms that Hamas remaining in Gaza is not tenable, and agrees there is no justification for the collective punishment of 2.2 million citizens in Gaza. What a pity they aren't leading the National Party right now, would appear, we might get a little bit more common sense on this. We know the SNP motion won't pass, so making it a vote of conscience would be the smart, empathetic thing to do for Labour. Instead, Starmer would rather show the whole country his control freakery again, and his lies again, in deference to the Israel lobby. Voters want to see a ceasefire, want to see their politicians stand up for what is right and just and humane, but neither leader of either main party is prepared to do it. Now, you expect the Tories to be like this, a more hateful bunch of politicians you can ever hope to meet. But people do expect Labour to be better. Labour is held to a higher standard. Instead, they are exactly the same now under the politicians leading them. Starmer and co are playing politics with people's lives. And so, of course, to compound their depravity even further, that is exactly what they are accusing the SNP of doing. One notable example, given Scottish Labour's agreement with the need for a ceasefire, still in opposition to Starmer's position, despite telling them he backed a ceasefire just 2 days ago, as I said, was a response by Scottish Labour MP Ian Murray to a tweet by Scottish Lib Dem MP Alistair Carmichael, who was complaining that the Lib Dems had reached out to the SNP to get them to include a message of the need for a political process and the two-state solution, to which they've been rebuffed. Well, Murray said, "My experience too. When government has a majority of 60 and you don't want to work with others to try to win the vote, then it's clear the purpose of the motion is not to win it. Submitting a motion to deliberately fail while telling the public it'll pass is deplorable, especially given the subject." Well, the SNP know it will fail. The Tories will ensure that. They have a majority, as you just admitted. So it doesn't matter if the SNP worked with the entirety of the opposition benches. It would still fail. But it seeks to shame politicians who won't back it. It says to the world what Britain could and should be standing for. And by shaming politicians into opposing that or abstaining on it, it's showing the general public that they're completely out of step with all of us. And as was shown last time, the public will be incensed by this. The SNP haven't told anyone it will pass. Nobody can ever predict the outcome of a vote with certainty. So this is just a really pathetic, dishonest response to a really pathetic Lib Dem whinge. The SNP motion is solid. It says exactly what it does on the tin, and the SNP attitude is take it or leave it. And why not? Back a ceasefire for the reasons given, or don't, and answer to your constituents about that. At the end of the day, they stepped up to do this. The SNP get 3 opposition day debates per parliamentary session, just 3. Labour gets 17, so there's no excuse for them not to have done something about this by now. Just simply Starmer doesn't want to. And if you want to play politics with this matter, as you rightly say, that is deplorable. Look no further than David Lammy doing the rounds again. Hear what he said on Sky yesterday.
Could you hold your nose and vote for it if it is the best thing on the table tomorrow?
I don't want to do anything in an election year in which the Labour Party might have the privilege of serving that cuts across our ability to do that. And if you look at the detail of that SNP motion, it's not balanced. And that is the problem as I see it with the SNP motion.
It's an election year. I don't want to rock the boat if it might damage Labour's chances of getting into power. Voting against a ceasefire, saying to my constituents my job is more important than this vote or what you think about a ceasefire, is where I'm at. That's David Lammy, folks. Tottenham, he's been on the gravy train at your expense for more than 20 years now. You do need a change. But actually, it's more than just about the SNP and Labour here, because Starmer and his absolute loyalty to the Israel lobby has meant the Tories have been able to trap him here too. There's an argument that they have forced Starmer to choose between backing the SNP or opposing them, because, just like last time, Labour have tabled their own amendment to the SNP motion. And of course last time, when they abstained on the SNP vote, they were able to say, well, we did vote for a ceasefire because we voted for our amendment. The trouble is, this time the Tories have tabled an amendment too. And this is a big problem for Starmer because by convention, the Tories' amendment, being the party of government, means Labour's won't be heard. Their amendment will not be selected. But, and it's a big but, there are rumours circulating at the moment that the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle, is trying to get Labour off this hook by changing the standing orders so he can call Labour's amendment anyway. Whether he'll get away with it without the Tories kicking off, we'll have to see. At any rate, barring the Speaker intervening to help Labour, which will get called out for the blatant abuse of impartiality that it would be, This is how we now know Starmer will vote against, whereas before he was considering abstaining again. He's decided that voting against a ceasefire is his preferred option. He'd rather side with the Tories than side with what is right. He's so sure he's going to get into number 10 that he believes even now he can get away with doing this. He knows he will have a rebellion on his hands. Last time 56 MPs rebelled. This time it really should be more. And the bigger the rebellion, the weaker he's going to look. But there's no escape for Labour MPs who toe the party line this time either. There will be no get out of jail free card courtesy of their own amendment. So they are under a lot more pressure to do the right thing this time, to stand up against oppression and not play party politics along party lines to suit Starmer's pro-Israel backers. Protests outside constituency offices and Labour HQ are underway today as a show of that. Obviously, I'll cover what happens after the vote. The further fallout from how Labour votes if they see this through, as we're told Starmer is planning to do, will remain to be seen. But the Muslim vote is already abandoning him. Perhaps he figures these are still acceptable losses, though. I figured his Weasley words to Scottish Labour the other day was an attempt to offset further vote losses amongst that demographic. Perhaps I got it wrong. Perhaps I've called that wrong, in which case. But his performance to Scottish Labour, with what we now know he'll do tonight, or what is expected he'll do tonight, save the Speaker intervening, really does expose the man's ardent dishonesty, even within the span of just 48 hours. All the details on that are on this video here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next bit. Cheers, folks.